Hi, I'm Katie Babbick,
And I'm Arin Babbick.
and this is Catastrophe Chronicles. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first podcast. We are so excited.
Really excited.
Like I said, my name is Katie Babbick, and I'm married to
Me.
Arin Babbick over here, and we decided to start a podcast together. Full disclosure, we are brand new to this. We are in our living room, and we have 4 kids. So if you hear some pounding,
That's them
it's
being
probably one of them.
rhinoceroses above us.
Yep, that's right. So this podcast is going to be all about disasters and catastrophes that happen in history. And for the first one, it took me a little bit of time to figure out what I wanted to do. And I ultimately settled on Aberfan. Arin, do you know anything about Aberfan?
I do not.
Nothing at all?
Nothing at all. No, other than what you said about how it is somewhat horrifying. So I've got my drink here. I'm ready.
Yeah,
I'm ready to be horrified.
We made mudslides for this podcast.
Foreshadowing.
It is a little bit of foreshadowing for those of you who know. I just want to say, before we jump into the story, a big trigger warning that this story involves children.
Oh, all right.
A lot of children.
A lot of children.
So let's dig into it. You ready?
Yes, let's do it.
I really wanted to start this one with a quote because this quote absolutely, it broke my heart. This is a quote from Cyril Vaughan, and he was a witness to what happened in Aberfan. The quote is, "Everything was quiet, as if nature had realized a terrible mistake had been made and nature was speechless."
Oof.
So to start, Aberfan really needs some background for you to fully understand what's going on. Aberfan is a small mining town in Wales, really in like the southern part of Wales. And this is set in 1966. So Wales was a big coal mine, basically. There were coal mines dotted all over Wales and little mining towns, very similar to kind of what you have here in like West Virginia, where you have those little coal mining villages.
Yeah, like up in the Appalachian Mountains.
Yeah, up in the Appalachians. And that was a lot of Wales, and Aberfan was one of those towns. And in Aberfan, it was connected to the Merthyr Vale colliery. Coal was kind of on the decline at this point. A lot of coal mines had been closed and whatnot, but it was still, particularly in this town and in a lot of villages like it, the primary source of jobs, employment in the area. Now, mines were dangerous. And this, obviously, I think you can tell by now, is going to be a mining disaster that happened. Mm-hmm. By this time, around 6,000 people had been killed in mining accidents up until that point in the UK in mining accidents. Now, collieries need what's called tips to be able to function. Now, the tips are where they put all of the coal waste. So coal waste is basically all the stuff they dig up that isn't coal. They need somewhere to put it. They can't put it back in. It also includes old pipes. It includes basically everything that comes out of the mine or things that are broken that has nowhere else to go.
Okay.
So tips are, they're just giant mountains of waste. Huge mountains of waste. Now, the Merthyr Vale colliery had 7 tips at this point, which means
a lot of waste.
When tip 1 filled all the way up, or they decided it was filled up, they moved on to tip 2, tip 3, tip 4, and they were on to tip 7 at this point. And I'm sorry, tip 7 opened in 1958. In tips, there's kind of subsections of waste as well. The important one for us in this context is tailings. Tailings is another type of coal waste, and what's important to understand in this story is tailings, they're much lighter. They're not big rocks or anything. It's very easy for them to turn into mud. And tips that have tailings in them are considered to be less stable.
Okay.
Aberfan is in a valley. The tips are mostly up on the mountains at this point because they had filled all the valley areas. Tip number 7 was up on a mountain. And over time, tip number 7 very clearly started to be over a couple of underground springs. Does that sound good?
No, this doesn't sound good at all. Up above you, above spring.
Yep.
Underground springs.
Yep. And these springs, and this is important for later, are notated on 2 different surveys. An ordnance survey that was made in...
Oh, so they knew about them too.
So they knew about both of these springs, or they knew about these springs, and they were mentioned in 2 different surveys. The first survey was made in 1919. It was an ordnance survey. And the second one was made in 1959 in a geological survey. So, like, these are government-funded surveys, and the springs underneath this tip are very clearly notated in them.
Okay.
So this coal tip at this point was also 111 feet high. There were not any...
Jesus.
Yeah. So on top of a mountain behind the village and 111 feet high. At this point, there was no official guidance or laws on how tall a tip could be. But there was guidelines, and I'm putting that in quotation marks for a reason, because the
Air quotes.
guidelines were not, they were not enforceable in any way, but they existed. And the guidelines said that tips should not be any taller than 20 feet
Oh my
if on a
God.
mountain. So it was 5 times taller than what conventional wisdom. And I mean, you already laughed about it. We don't know anything about mining. We're not coal people at all. And even we can say 111 feet, pretty freaking tall to be on the side of a mountain, much less on the side of a mountain on top of springs.
Yeah, we're not shaping up well here.
This is not going well already. So tip number 7 was actually made because in 1958, a bunch of people started complaining about tip number 6. Tip number 6 was also on the mountain, and it was starting to fail, and a bunch of community members were complaining about it. So they were like, cool, we'll just move it over here a little bit. We'll build this one.
Typical.
Very typical. It gets worse, though. Over the years, there were numerous complaints that were given about tip number 7. Some of the most damning in light of what ended up happening are from a man named D.C.W. Jones, who was somebody who worked in the mine. In a letter he wrote on July 24th, 1963 to his superiors, he said, "The slurry is so fluid and the gradient so steep, it could not possibly stay in position in the winter or in periods of heavy rain." He sent that to his superior on the NCB, which is the National Coal Board, which oversaw all mining and all that kind of stuff.
I'm sure they just said, it's fine.
Yep. Another one sent not much later was titled "Danger from Coal Slurry Being Tipped at the Rear of Pantglass School." That letter read, "You are no doubt well aware that the tips at Merthyr Vale Tower above the Pantglass area, and if they were to move, a very serious position would occur." In another letter sent on August 20th, 1963, it read, "It is likely to be of danger to the Pantglass School."
So, warning, you're going to bury the children.
Very much. Warning, you're going to bury the children. Now, the way the geography was set up, you had the mountain that the Merthyr Vale Colliery was on, and then you had the tips on the top of the mountain, and right at the base of the mountain was Pantglass Junior School. And Pantglass Junior School was you could look out the windows and see the tips very easily. It was surrounded by row homes. In between the school and the mountain, there was a couple of little farms and whatnot. And it was the back of the school that backed up to the mountain. The front of the school faced inside of the town. At this time, when those letters were sent, answer that, the response from the NCB was effectively, "Cool. We have nowhere else to put it. Good luck."
What do you want us to do about it?
In the inquiry later, after what happened,
Good Lord.
It was very much implied that if people complained too much, they were going to shut down this colliery. And obviously, that's not going to work. This is where the majority of people work in the town. Without the colliery, the town is going to die. I mean, it's terrible. And that brings us to October 21st, 1966. To set the scene, it had been raining for weeks. It's Wales. It rains a lot.
All the time.
On that day, in the town, it was extremely foggy. Visibility was only about 50 feet in front of it. At the top of the mountain, where the tip was, the miners were just starting to arrive at work. It was around 7:30 in the morning. And when they got there, they noticed that the middle of the tip, because again, remember the tip is a giant mountain on a mountain. The middle of it had formed a crater that had fallen about 10 feet into it. So it was starting a depression thing, like volcano, almost in the middle of it. Yep. They didn't have a phone.
Sign.
No, it was not. They didn't have a phone at the top, not because phones didn't exist, obviously, but people kept stealing the phone cords because they were copper wired.
Oh my God.
So, and I just think that's kind of a funny part of the story. I mean, it's not funny, but it's a little funny. So they went down to tell their boss, and their boss said, "Okay, we need to move our equipment away from this depression." So they went back up, And when they got back up there, they're moving their stuff away. And at that point, they realized that the middle of it had fallen another 10 feet. So it's now down about 20 feet in the middle. And they go and they move their stuff a little bit further back, and then they decide to take a break. And this break is likely what saved their lives. They're very British, well, very Welsh. And they went to go have some tea. And they were going to come back
With
in
the
a little
crumpets.
bit. And while they were having tea, they looked out, and one of the miners described the tip as rising up and then falling very suddenly.
That's not a good sign.
No, what he couldn't see from his vantage point there was that the bottom of the tip had started to bulge. And then when the tip fell, the inside of the tip had exploded. A giant avalanche of quicksand-like material, of tip waste, of coal waste. It's called slurry. Rocketed down the side of this mountain. It went through a farm, and it landed, it directly drove into the back of Pantglass Junior School.
And of course, the kids had already arrived at school.
Yep. This was at about 9:15 in the morning. The children started school at 9. And this, unfortunately, in a lot of disaster stories, you hear about, oh, it could have been so much worse if XYZ.
It could have been it was so much worse because...
Yeah. When we talk about 9/11, we talk about how, because it was so early in the morning, the buildings weren't full. For Pantglass School, they were supposed to have an assembly that morning, but they changed it to the afternoon because it was a half day. The next day, they were going on vacation. So the children were all in their classrooms.
Wow.
If they had been at the assembly, they would have been on the other side of the school. And while there certainly would have been injuries, the death toll wouldn't have been nearly as high. A lot of the kids, some of the kids weren't there that day because in the UK, if you pass your final exams, you don't have to go on the last day. But there were still quite a few kids there. And this is the junior school. So this is 1st to 5th graders.
Oh.
And so there's 7 classrooms at Pantglass Junior School. 4 of the 7 classrooms were completely inundated and destroyed. And this is primarily the kids that were on the older end of the spectrum at that school, 7 to 11 years old. And this is part of why this story always gets me in the feels, because our kids, 3 of our 4 kids
7
would have been
to 11.
Yep. And it's absolutely horrifying. And to add on, to make this even worse, in 1963, tip number 7 had actually failed before.
Oh, it had already failed.
Not only had it failed, it went down the same path. And it stopped about 500 feet from the closest farm. If it had kept going, it would have taken the same path. So this slip, part of why it went so far is because it was going over a previous slip that had happened. And no one had done it. So I'm going to say again,
Oh my
I gave
God.
a trigger warning. This is awful.
Can you not see it coming?
I know. I'm going to say again, this is another trigger warning because this is the part where we really get into some not super awesome stuff with kids.
All right, I'm going to drink some more.
You're going to drink some more. Have some more of that mudslide. So,
Wow.
on the way down the side of the mountain, this slurry, this avalanche, this terribleness also broke 2 water mains. So now we're adding more water to this, making it even worse. But once it stops, it starts to kind of get this consistency of concrete.
Oh, God.
Of the children that survived and of the people that survived, they described it as sounding like a jet engine just coming down the hill, like a train coming at you, like thunder right over you. Just this loud, enormous, just rumbling boom coming down the hill. The children who were in the classrooms that got hit, to a man, kind of described that, and they describe how fast it happened, how they didn't have any time to do almost anything. One of the girls we're going to talk about is Gaynor Madgwick, and she saw it coming out the window, and she stood up to run, and that's when it hit. It was pretty instantaneous and pretty terrible. Of the survivors, we're going to go through some of their stories here. We're actually going to start with Gaynor, because Gaynor I read her book, and it was just absolutely amazing. She was 8 at the time of the disaster. And like I said, she stood up when she saw it coming and tried to run, but she didn't make it. When the avalanche hit, it slammed her into the far back of the classroom. She had been at the front. And when she came to, her legs were underneath a radiator.
Oh, my God.
Definitely broken. But that's what likely saved her life because it kept her from being stuck under the slurry. So she didn't suffocate. Her, top half of her body was up. And she describes being in absolute shock. There was a child's arm on her shoulder who didn't make it. And next to her was one of the books they had been reading for school. And she really didn't know what else to do. So she picked up that book and she started reading and waiting.
Oh my
Because this poor child was just in absolute shock.
How could you not be?
We're going to get into more of the rescuers and people that came. But for the children's stories, for Gaynor's story, one of the most touching parts is her grandfather was the one who found her in that classroom. He came in and he saw her there and he told her that he was going to get her out. But unfortunately for Gaynor and for her grandfather, they couldn't get to her right away. There was just too much between her and the window. There was too many bodies. There was too many desks, too many different things. So she had to wait while they dug out a lot of the rest of the classroom before she could get out.
Hooray, childhood trauma.
Oh, absolutely. Now, Gaynor had 5 siblings at the time. There were 3 who were in Pantglass Junior School. Her little brother, Carl, was 7, and he was in the classroom next door on one side. And her older sister, Marilyn, was in the other classroom, and she was 10 on the other side. Unfortunately, both Carl and Marilyn passed away in the disaster. Gaynor was the only one of that family who survived. Part of her story includes her father, Cliff Manette, because at the time her married name is Madgwick. Cliff Manette was one of the miners that was up on the hill. He ran to the school pretty much immediately. He jumped in through a window and he didn't realize it at the time, but he was in the hallway behind where his son Carl was in the classroom. And when he jumped in, he found one of the teachers inside just screaming. And he asked her, did the kids get out? Where are the children? And the teacher yelled at him, no, they're all still in there. So this really just, I feel like it puts in perspective how much of a family town this was. Everyone was there. Everyone was helping. These children's parents were in there trying to dig them out of the wreckage. Just absolutely heart-wrenching on every single level. Another child, Jeff Edwards. Jeff Edwards was the last child to be pulled out of the wreckage. Lots of more kids survived, but Jeff was one of 10 kids that were pulled out, and he was the last child that was pulled out. He was pulled out about 2 hours after the slurry hit. Jeff describes hearing the slurry like a jet engine coming at him. He had just stood up to get a copy of Adventures of Tintin from the school library shelf when it hit. And his story just, Jeff describes he was stuck under a desk. His foot was stuck under a radiator, and the radiator was just shooting hot water over his feet while he was stuck there. On his shoulder was one of his classmates' head, and she was very clearly passed away. Jeff Edwards has become one of the more outspoken children who survived Aberfan, and one of the documentaries I watched shows him meeting with the 2 rescuers, the 2 firefighters who pulled him out. And it was just one of the more touching moments from that documentary for me. Like, it was just really beautiful to see them getting together. And it's really cool to see all the, he's done a ton of community outreach, education. He just became a really influential person in his community after. In another classroom, all of the children were still in their desks with their teacher standing at the front of the room with her arms spread as if she was trying to shield them from the slurry as it came. Another student, Karen Thomas, and 4 of her classmates were on an errand to pay the dinner lady, which from what I can tell is like a lunch lady in Wales.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. And so they went to pay her. The dinner lady's name was Nancy Williams. And Nancy Williams saw the slurry coming. And without thinking twice, she immediately scooped up all 5 of these students and hugged them to her and took the full brunt of the slurry. And all 5 of those girls survived because of Nancy Williams.
Go lunch lady.
Absolutely. Karen Thomas describes knowing that she had been saved, but trying to get Nancy Williams to wake up after she had died. She died on impact, pretty much. All Karen could reach, because again, they're stuck in this slurry, was Nancy's hair. And she was pulling her hair until she was pulled out of the wreckage, trying to get Nancy to answer back. Yeah. David Bainon, the head teacher, was another one of these just heroic teachers. He was found cradling 5 students near the blackboard. And it was surmised that he most likely just scooped the children that were closest to them and tried to protect them. Unfortunately, in that case, all of them passed away. Now, I need to remember that at this point, the water mains are breaking. So not only are there injured children in there, it's flooding now too. A lot of the slurry is becoming hard, but a lot of it is also now got water flowing over it because there's
I thought we had hit the worst of it. Clearly not.
No, I mean, I think we're through most of the worst of it, but it's just to give you an idea of what these rescuers and what these children were living through. There was water everywhere. There was this slurry that was sticking them in. Philip Thomas, I want to say benefited from that, but Philip Thomas was at the senior school, which was just a few doors down in the playground area. And he ended up getting a pretty serious injury to his leg that was bleeding. But because the mud was so just quicksand-like, that mud ended up plugging the injury and stopping the bleeding. And that's why he survived. But getting him out was a bit of an adventure because he was really close to drowning because he was stuck in all of this muck and the water was coming. And they were holding his head up above the water. And they did get him out. He did survive. But like, this was absolutely brutal. The good part about this story, and I say good with reticence, but it's worth acknowledging that people, oh my God, did they respond immediately. From the first moment that this slurry hit the school, there were people, anyone who wasn't injured ran and started digging kids out. There were women who were literally just digging with their hands, and some of the miners described these women as having absolutely no skin left by the time they got there because they were just digging children out. The miners who saw what happened immediately ran from the mine or took cars if they were too far away and drove directly there and started digging these kids out and these people out. Because remember, there's also 18 homes that have been buried under this slurry as well. This was the infancy of news. So news spread of TV news. The news of this spread very, very quickly. Information was getting out there and people just started showing up. All told, there ended up being around 2,000 rescuers. They were forming human chains. They would pass the sludge out from the school. So it got far enough away so they weren't building up another pile nearby. Right?
Yeah, we don't need another tip, right?
No, they kept the area clean. While they were cleaning out, there was a miner rescue squad. The miner rescue squad, I think you can surmise, was actually put together to rescue miners. This is the first time they were called to something other than a mine, but they were very uniquely qualified to be able to dig out of this. So they were leading a lot of this rescue effort. Every time they thought they heard someone, they would blow a whistle. All, 2,000 some odd people would go absolutely silent to see if they could hear a child crying or whatever it was. Unfortunately, like I said, after Jeff Edwards, no one else was found alive. And Jeff Edwards was pulled out about 2 hours after the tip hit.
I mean, and it's a long time to be stuck in concrete, essentially.
Yeah, it's a very, very long time. Fairly quickly, Charles Nunn was brought in to help kind of organize the mortuary aspect of this. A makeshift mortuary was set up at Bettiana Chapel, which was just a little ways up from the school. And in the chapel, they set it up so that the children's bodies were laid out on pews under blankets. The adults were set up on stretchers over the top of pews. When they brought the children in, there was a little Sunday school room in the back that had a little sink. The doctors and nurses and volunteers would wash the children off because they're just covered in this absolute sludge, coal waste. They would write a description of them and a description of what they had in their pockets. And they would use that to kind of help the parents know which bodies they should check to be able to figure out if it was their children or not. The church was so full that they could only bring in 2 sets of relatives at a time. And what ended up happening, because again, there were so many kids, is that the parents formed a queue. And it took a little over 5 days, I think it was, to get all of the bodies out. So you got to picture these parents were waiting in the queue. They would go in, they wouldn't find their child, and they would very calmly walk back to the back of the line and wait again so that they could go back through. And they did this for days.
I can't even imagine.
How you feeling? Doing all right? We're almost through the worst of we're almost through the bad stuff. Almost there. You doing all right?
Oh yeah, that's rough.
Yeah. This is a tough one. This is a really, really tough one. It's tougher than I thought to be saying it outright. After the bodies were identified and they were put in coffins, they were then taken to Capel Aberfan, which was just a little ways away. And I thought this was really interesting. The burial and cremation certificates were handed out from a local fish and chip shop that was 5 doors down from the chapel. I know. You got to remember, I mean, it's kind of funny, but you have to remember this is a small town. Everyone knew where that was. And it was decided at that point because everyone knew where it was. And again, this is a very, very small town that was going to be the best.
Look, you do what you got to do.
I don't know if I could ever have lunch at the local fish and chip shop after that, though. Like, I actually tried to look up how long they stayed in business after, and I couldn't find much information because I was curious on that. At the end, all things said and done, there were 144 fatalities. 116 of those were children. Children ranging from the age of 3 months, which was a child who died in their home, up to 82 years of age. 52 of the boy children and 52 of the girl children were found in the junior school, along with 5 teachers. 6 children perished in the senior school playground. 6 children and 23 adults perished in their homes. So, this is awful. I wanted to include one small part that doesn't get included in a lot of other places. Lord Snowdon was Princess Margaret's husband, and he was Welsh. He was born in Wales. He heard the news, and he quite literally grabbed a shovel and got on a train. He arrived at 2 a.m., so pretty much as quickly as he could get there. And when the people running, the operation there heard he was coming, they waited for him at the train station, and they waited at first class for him. But the man didn't even take first class. He just got the first ticket he could. He took second class from London all the way to Wales and got off the train with a shovel and just asked, "What can I do to help?"
Good man.
Absolutely. I mean, that's an incredible story, especially when you hear some of what the other people in government did. What he ended up doing after the disaster, during, all of this cleanup and whatnot, he didn't end up digging, but they said what he could really do where he would be helpful is if he would comfort the people. So he went around to bereaved parents' homes. He made them tea. Literally made them tea. Sat in their living rooms, talked with them, talked with the children who survived, just generally was comforting to the community there and the people who were around. On October 27th, the largest funeral for the children happened. 81 children and 1 mother were buried together in the Aberfan cemetery. The mother was buried between her 2 children. She passed away. She was in one of the homes next to the school, and her 2 children were in the panic glass school. Shortly after that, 8 days after the disaster, the Queen finally visited. There was a lot of kind of consternation in the media that she took so long to visit, and it was reported later in her life that was actually one of her greatest regrets, that she waited as long as she did. But I mean, I can understand why she waited as long as she did. Because anytime you bring, look at when we have presidents go and visit hurricane disasters.
There's a lot of attention that comes with that.
Well, not even the attention, the amount of security and people that come with a head of state visit. I'm sure it was less in 1966, but I personally can see why she waited. The amount of people that come with a visit like that is it's a ton. And I think you already have 2,000 rescuers, adding in the Queen and everything that comes with that. I think it would have hampered a lot of the rescue efforts.
And it's quite likely she waited out of respect, too.
Well, she had said that one of the main reasons she waited was she didn't want to hamper rescue attempts, what was going on there.
Yeah.
And truthfully, the Queen can't do what Lord Snowdon did. Her Majesty couldn't hop on second class with a shovel and show up.
I mean, she's a queen.
I guess she can do whatever she wants, but I'm pretty sure that's not going to roll.
I think there's some people who wouldn't let that happen.
There's some people who definitely were like, nah. And for good reason, right? So that is the story of the actual, what happened in the disaster itself. And I just kind of wanted to see where you're at. Are you doing okay?
I mean, I'm okay. I might be scarred a little bit.
Little bit, little bit. Does this feel like when I tell you stories at night right before you're going to bed? And you're just staring at the ceiling going, why?
Yeah, why right before bed? Coincidentally, we are doing this right before bed.
We have to do it right before bed. There's no other time our house is quiet.
No. And even then, it's a struggle.
Right? The amount of times, like, hopefully it won't show up when we edit this, but y'all, the number of times we have had to stop recording to go, like,
chase a kid back to bed or
rescue a cat from a kid.
Oh my gosh.
It's chaos.
But no, I'm doing okay. It's
You sure you're okay?
You weren't wrong. It's a horrific story.
Because I gotta be real honest. It's about to get worse.
Oh, you saved one in the chamber, huh?
I saved a lot in the chamber, but this part, there's a lot we can say here. I want you to think back to the beginning of the episode where I was telling you there were multiple letters sent. People knew the spring was there. These things, like, people knew that this was potentially a problem. In fact, people knew that this was potentially a danger to Pantglass School. I'm sure you can predict that there is some government fuckery coming up here.
I love government fuckery.
There's always government fuckery because, like Ronald Reagan said, what's the scariest thing that you can hear?
Government.
Hello, I'm from the government, and I'm here to help. Lord Robbins. Lord motherfucking Robbins. He was the head.
Was that his official title?
It's his official title now. He was the head of the NCB, the National Coal Board. So he's in charge of all of this. Lord Robbins was told about what had happened really quickly. What do you think he did?
Lamented the loss of productivity.
Lord Robbins didn't go directly to the school.
Of course not.
Lord Robbins was due to have a ceremony for him because he was being installed as the Chancellor of the University of Surrey. So I just want you to picture this. The UK is absolutely goddamn incredible with how they do their ceremonies. I mean, the pomp and the circumstance, the robes, all of this.
The robes.
The robes.
The robes are a
the
thing.
robes. So this man is decked out in UK finery, being installed as the Chancellor of the University of Surrey, having a party while they are digging dead children out of coal. Robes. Fancy ass robes. Parties. Now that's day one.
That was the first day?
That's while this was happening. Day one. He decided to do that.
Wait. So he's told.
He's told.
And he's like, well, I got a party to go to.
Basically.
Dick.
Do you think he showed up day two?
No.
Nope. He showed up 36 hours later. While he, wasn't there, the Secretary of State for Wales called, some of his people, his underlings, to find out what was going on. And his people told the Secretary of Wales that he was personally directing the recovery effort. Now,
oh, dick.
Oh, complete. I could not find any definitive evidence that this man told his people to say that, but I don't know, man. At the very least, he was cool with it.
No, that just sounds like some institutionally ingrained bullshit right there.
Yep. Yeah. Now, he showed up 36 hours later and he talked to the press and denied all responsibility. Complete and totally.
Oh.
In fact, one of the direct quotes from this man, this human pile of garbage, was
mad.
No, you're gonna be so mad by the end of this. He told reporters, he for real, with a straight face, told reporters it was impossible to know that there were springs at the heart of the tip.
Son of a bitch.
I'm gonna bring up again the 1919 Ordnance Survey and the 1959 Geological Survey.
Oh, I'm remembering them well.
These are surveys. Not only that, the miners used to drink from the springs before tip number 7 was there. Not only that, the children of the town would play in the slurry-filled streams that would come down from tip number 7.
Oh my God.
This was well known. And again, I think it's really important to point out that there was people complaining, but it's not like there was this massive protest against it. Because again, the colliery was necessary for the town's survival. That's where everyone worked.
Hey, don't rock the boat or you're all fucked.
Yep, pretty much. And we're going to get to the inquiry here in a minute, but I think a lot of that guilt carried into a lot of different things that happened. And I think Lord Robbins took advantage of that. I think he knew that these people could not complain. Because
Oh,
if they did,
absolutely.
and he was willing to kind of, and again, I don't have definitive proof of this. This is just my own personal opinion. I think he wrote that and he was hoping it would get him through it, that he could just deny responsibility because ultimately, again, he was in charge of whether or not that colliery stayed there. He could have closed it that day and the miners knew it. He knew it. Everyone knew it. And I think he thought he could get away with completely denying any responsibility and no one would do it.
Hey, you're a giant douche without saying you're a giant douche.
Completely. Absolutely horrific. One person who did do some good was the Prime Minister, Harold Wilson. Harold Wilson, the day of the disaster, went to Aberfan and he said, we're going to do an inquiry on this. And he was good to his word. On October 25th, he got an inquiry, basically legislation to say we're going to have an inquiry past Parliament on October 25th. And the inquiry started on November 2nd. So, I mean, that's
fast for government work.
That's really fast. The inquiry ended up lasting 76 days, which is the longest any inquiry in England had lasted up until that point. Now, this is where you're going to get a little bit mad again.
Bring it.
The National Coal Board denied all responsibility for 70 days of that inquiry.
Of course.
They saw 136 witnesses and 300 exhibits. And it wasn't until the very end that the National Coal Board started admitting fault. Because they're proving it again and again and again. Like, it's obvious that the National Coal Board was at fault for this, that this was not an act of nature. This was not random.
Totally preventable.
This was completely and totally preventable. And they were proving it again and again. But the National Coal Board until day 70, nope. I'm so surprised. What a shock. But on day 70, that's when Lord motherfucking Robbins showed up. And he took some responsibility. Enough that they were able to close. And what I find particularly horrifying about that is this inquiry probably wouldn't have lasted so long if they had just taken responsibility from the beginning. They put these people through months of inquiry where they would
reliving it over and over again.
And there was a point in the inquiry where the coroner came up and was talking about the causes of death for all of the people.
Oh, God.
And the majority of causes of death were asphyxiation. So there were obviously some other, like, more brutal things. And during that part of the inquiry, one of the fathers of the children who passed away stood up and started screaming at this man. And he was yelling, I mean, this is a direct quote from him. "I want it recorded. Buried alive by the National Coal Board. That is what I want to see on record. That is the feeling of those present. Those are the words we want to go on the certificates."
Good God.
Was he wrong, though?
No.
Like, that is absolutely what happened to these
I'm surprised no one tried to kill the dude.
The coroner kind of poo-pooed him and was like, "I know you're really upset, but these are accidental deaths. We're not going to write that." And that's not what's on their death certificates, just as a side note to make you a little bit more mad.
Oof.
The National Coal Board, through Lord Dumbass Robbins, finally
Sir
admits,
Lord Dumbass Robbins.
finally admits culpability. And the findings of the inquiry were, I think this is obvious, that the National Coal Board was completely and totally responsible.
Thank God there's some justice.
There is. This is a good part, kind of. I think the most damning quote from the inquiry was, "The Aberfan disaster could and should have been prevented. The report which follows tells not of wickedness, but of ignorance, ineptitude, and a failure in communications. Ignorance on the part of those charged at all levels with the silting, control, and daily management of tips. Bungling ineptitude on the part of those who had the duty of supervising and directing them, and failure on the part of those having knowledge of factors which affect tip safety to communicate that knowledge and to see that it was applied."
Oh, no, that's total horseshit. They're blaming the workers.
They did blame the workers. So like I said, it's mostly good because they did absolutely find the National Coal Board. And I don't have the direct quote for this, but they said the National Coal Board, the NCB, should be financially responsible for everything here. But they did. They blamed the workers. They also didn't say it was villainy. And I'm sorry. I think it's villainy from the people up top that they used these people's fear of losing their jobs to do nothing.
Is it just greed?
Isn't that what it always is, though?
Yeah.
Not always greed. It's just always fucking greed. How many people do you think got fired?
Not a one.
Not-
Wait. Someone low on the totem pole.
Nope. No one.
Not a single one.
How many people do you think got prosecuted in any shape or form?
Oh, gonna go on the trend and say none.
None. How many people do you think faced any real repercussions?
None.
None at all. And our bestie, Lord motherfucking Robbins.
Sir, Lord motherfucking Robbins.
Not too long after,
Douche extraordinaire.
Lord Robbins was chosen
Of course he was.
to chair a review of health and safety board.
No, fuck off.
Yep.
No.
And that board ultimately resulted in the Health and Safety Act of 1974, which is still in effect today. Yep. That's real. That's a thing. That's a real thing. So how are you feeling? How you
All right, so
doing?
he's now on my list of if they invent a time machine to go back and punch him in the dick. Because seriously, like, what?
Fuck that guy. Like, oh my God, what a terrible. And I mean, you compare him to like Lord Snowden. Lord Snowden had like the royal family by 1966 had no real power. And Lord Snowden, he got his shovel.
And got on a damn
He got
train.
on a train. Like, if we could all be a little bit more like Lord Snowden in this story.
Like, that guy's okay by my. You're like,
Right?
We're good.
Absolutely. And then you've got Lord Robbins, who has actual power to do anything, literally anything. Nope, nothing. No
Now
repercussions.
I'm going to go to a fancy party.
I'm going to go to a party.
I'm going to wear my robe.
Then I'm going to, like, I don't know, sleep it off the next day.
Well, he had tied one or two on.
It's insanity. Insanity. So again, check in. We good?
Yeah.
You feeling comfy?
Well, this is just clear. The peasants don't matter.
The peasants don't. Are you ready to hold on to yourself, to brace yourself?
Oh, God, there's more?
But wait,
Oh.
there's more.
All right, hit me.
I'm ready. All right. Almost immediately after the disaster, a relief fund was set up, a charity relief fund. It was called the Aberfan Disaster Relief. And again, I'm going to remind you that this is really the first major disaster that was broadcast all over the world. So this relief fund it was over 90,000 individual donations.
I mean, that's a ton of money.
It's a
especially
ton.
at that time.
Well, no, that's not the amount of money. That's the amount of individual donations.
I'm
The
assuming
amount
that.
of money was £1,750,000. In today's money, that's around 28 million pounds. That's a ton of money.
Oh, yeah.
A ton of money. And this charity fund was set up and in its, bylaws directed to be used specifically to help the people of Aberfan that were affected by this disaster. It was set up by the mayor of Merthyr Vale.
I thought you were going to say it was set up by Lord Douche.
No, it was not set up by Lord Douche. I looked up to see if Lord Robbins donated to it, and I couldn't find any records because I wanted to know.
Of course he wouldn't donate.
Maybe he did, but I couldn't find any official
I'm going to doubt it.
records. Well, I don't know. I feel like he's the kind of man who would just throw money at it. But I also feel like
Sure.
if he had donated, he probably would have been. I donated.
Pretty loud about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This charity fund had a board of trustees, and it was pretty much it wasn't run by the government, but it was set up by the government, and the government chose the board of trustees. The trustees were not from Aberfan for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
One of the first things to come up for this was compensation for the families, specifically the families who lost children.
What is the value of your child's life?
So it's a number of members, a number of trustees wanted to ask the bereaved parents of Aberfan how close they were to their child.
What?
And if they were not found to be emotionally close, they wouldn't get any compensation. Can you believe that? I just want to point out, do you remember the other night when I yelled, "What the fuck?" And you asked me what was Wrong.
Yes.
That was this.
It makes so much sense now.
That was this.
Oh,
Does that not make you just like
oh my
see
God.
red?
Oh, I'm mad.
Oh, it's insanity.
I mean, this is,
Yeah. Oh, it is. Oh, their first amount that they wanted to give was $50 or 50 pounds per family that lost a child. I want to remind you that there were multiple families that lost 2 or 3 kids. 50 pounds. That is less than $1,000 today. Insanity. Absolute insanity. They ultimately settled on 500 pounds per child that passed away. Nothing for children that weren't injured. I'm going to repeat that. Nothing for children that weren't injured. That means physical injuries, not PTSD.
They were injured, but they got nothing.
Children that were injured got compensation and their medical bills and stuff covered. But children who were because there were children that were pulled out that had no injuries. And that's not even including, like, there was 1st and 2nd grade classrooms in the front of the school that all of the kids survived.
But we didn't believe mental illness or not mental illness.
It's still horrifying.
Oh, absolutely.
Really, really horrifying. But yeah, and that's going to be something that comes up, or the lack of belief in mental illnesses over the course of this. But yeah, 500 pounds per child. And it was considered to be very generous. Some of the trustees had wanted to give 5,000 pounds per child. But there was a lot of hay made that you could not give that kind of money to poor mining families because it would ruin them. Yeah. Keep the poors poor. Absolutely horrific. Now, let's talk about the tips. Let's talk about the tips. Let's make you feel better. Not JK. Sorry. So, tip number 7 is still there. Tip number 7 had about...
What, like today?
No. At this point.
Okay.
Like the disaster happened. No, it's not still there today. You were ready. You're ready to fight. You'll believe anything at this point.
Flat England.
Woo! You're like, I'm coming, Wales. I'm going to take it down myself. No, it's not there today. But, just picture it. We're after this disaster. Tip number 7 is still there. Tip number 7, when it failed, had about 300,000 cubic yards of coal waste. And around 150 cubic yards had just flowed into the town of Aberfan. But that tip is there. That tip is still on a spring. It is still there, looming over Aberfan. And these children, these people are in their homes looking at this tip. And it's there. And they started begging their local government to remove this tip. What do you think happened?
Not a damn thing.
It's not exactly. They did do some, I'm going to use my air quotes again, improvements. And then they told the people of Aberfan that essentially they were being overdramatic and offered to landscape, to hide the tip with flowers.
A fucking shrub?
Like shrubbery. They offered to landscape it. They were like, we don't need to get rid of it. We're just going to make it pretty. Are you joking?
Out of sight, out of mind. Look, if you can't see it, if you don't have to look at it, it won't be a problem.
Absolute fucking sanity. And again, Lord Robbins, he's the one who made it safe because he's still in charge of the National Coal Board.
Oh.
So the people of Aberfan are not feeling this. They are getting more and more angry. And this is where we get to like a super badass part of the story. The people of Aberfan
so ready for it.
Are pissed. And they have been begging. And they finally reach a point that they go to the Welsh office where the Secretary of State of Wales is. And they bring lorries, so like truckfuls of coal slurry and bags of coal slurry. And they just start dumping it in the reception area and up the steps of the Welsh office. And they start telling George Thomas, who was the current Secretary of State of Wales, that, look, you either get rid of the tips or we're going to. And we're going to give them to you. Because if you think we can live with it, you can live with it.
Good on them.
Badass. They got arrested.
Of course they did. Oh my God.
But that is a very brief point because it was very clear to like everyone very quickly that that was the wrong call. So they got let out. Like, I think it was within 2 days. It was very, very quick. And within a couple days of that particular protest, George Thomas goes, should probably get rid of the tips. And he agrees. But now we have the issue of funding. Who's going to pay?
No.
Who's going to pay, Arin?
Oh, of course the miners are going to pay. They're going to take it out of the relief fund.
Not entirely, but yeah, part of it ends up coming from the relief fund. The
Sons
National
of
Coal
bitches.
Board refuses initially to pay a dime. I'm going to remind everyone to think back to our discussion of the inquiry where they said the National Coal Board should be financially responsible
For
all of this.
everything.
So the National Coal Board says, nope, not doing it. And the government says, well, I don't want to pay for it. And they hammer out a deal. And the first deal was that the relief fund pay 250 pounds worth of this removal. And the removal is estimated to cost about £1 million. And they finally say, all right, you can pay 150 pounds. And they don't say it has to be from the relief fund, but they say the government will pay this much. The National Coal Board will pay 350, and you got to come up with the rest. And again, this is a poor mining town. That's where the money is. Their town's government was not offering to pay it. No one else was offering to pay it. And so their choice was, do we pay it from the relief fund and get rid of the tips? Or do we not get rid of the tips? So yeah, they paid it from the relief fund. Now, I will say the government did eventually return the money. In 1997, there's a law.
97.
No, listen, it gets worse. There's a law in the UK that after 30 years, most documents get released. And it's similar to kind of what happens here in the United States.
Okay, yeah.
But after a certain amount of time, documents become unclassified. So in 1997, that's when a lot of the documentation of this got released. And there was a couple of books put out that brought everything back.
My question, why was that classified in the first place? It's not a matter of national
They
security.
knew how fucked up they were. That's the only reason I can think of.
Well, yeah.
Like, they must have known.
It's covering their ass, that's all.
Absolutely horrible. But a book came out, a couple of books, and brought it all back to the public's attention. And they started pressuring the government, like, what the hell? So they gave the money back. But wait, how much money do you think they gave back?
The exact amount not adjusted for inflation.
The exact amount not adjusted for inflation. It took until 2007. And by that point, because that was the 50-year anniversary. And again, I mean, it's real coincidental for when it came back in the news. 50 years, and now, we're going to give back adjusted for inflation. Because the 50-year anniversary was coming up and people were going to the news like, we don't have enough money to pay for maintenance of the memorial garden. We don't have enough money to pay for maintenance of the graves. We don't have enough money for any of these things. So finally, the government got it together and gave back adjusted for inflation. But
So is it still a mining town now, today?
no, the mine was closed in 1989.
Okay.
And the town actually fell on some pretty tough times at that point.
Well, their livelihood gone.
Their livelihood was gone. And again, our closest reference point for you and me here in the United States would be like West Virginia.
Yeah.
And old mining towns in like the Appalachian Mountains and whatnot, and how those towns just kind of fell apart. And I'm not going to get into too much detail about this, but Jeff Edwards, that last child who was pulled out, he did a lot of work in the Aberfan community to really bring it back together and make it a better place, particularly after it fell apart. And he's a really kind of incredible dude. And I would encourage anyone who's listening and you to read more about it. Because again, we're pushing up on over an hour at this point. So I'm not going to get into too much more detail about that, but it's worth looking into. I did also want to touch on, this is the last kind of like fucked up thing that we're going to talk about. After this, there's going to be a lot more happy things. The chapel that was used as a mortuary.
Yes.
The congregants of that chapel wanted the chapel raised and a new one built.
Okay.
Which I totally get.
Yeah.
Like, how do you go
that's a lot of
worship? I'm not religious anymore, but I can imagine
that
I wouldn't want to go anywhere that was used as a mortuary for children, much less a place of worship.
It's too much memory.
Too much. Way too much. The NCB refused to do it. So the Disaster Relief Fund took that on. And they didn't raise the chapel, but they built a new chapel for Aberfan, which I think was, the National Coal Board should have paid for it, but that is less of a...
No, especially since, the findings, the the ruling was that they were
They
financially
should be
responsible for
financially
everything.
responsible. Just such insanity. But yeah, that is that.
Gotta
That's the
protect
worst of
corporate
it.
profits.
Obviously, the people of Aberfan really suffered with mental health. There was
Oh,
a lot
absolutely.
of premature deaths, particularly at that time, and particularly in Wales, and particularly in a Wales mining town. There was just no one talked about anything. Everyone kept it inside. There were a number of children that never spoke about it until the 50-year anniversary. And that's when you started getting more books and more like in-depth interviews of what happened because they didn't talk about it. And over time, there has been this really beautiful flourishing of like mental health help. Gaynor Madgwick wrote this absolutely beautiful book where she talks about when she was a teenager, she kept a diary. And that's part of what kept her sane because she got it out on paper. She couldn't talk about it, but she got it out in black and white.
Huh.
But she still feels, burdened. So she wanted to go and kind of put the pieces together because you got to imagine from the 8-year-old little girl's perspective, she really didn't see much. She was pulled out of that rubble. She went to a hospital for 3 months. She didn't know a lot of what happened. And putting the pieces back together and talking to people really helped her get to a better spot. And in that process, she talked to a lot of people who opened up for the first time. She talks about how her father and her mother talked about it for the first time. And a lot of that stuff, I think, is just, it's indicative of where we are as a society as we try and, sort through our mental health stuff and whatnot. But it's really cool to read about that and really cool to see that. Part of how the community coped as well was they formed these little communities together, which was really, really neat. The mothers started the Young Wives Club, particularly the bereaved mothers, but really any of the women that were there at the time. And they would do outings. They would chat. Clearly not about the disaster itself, but they created a community within a community for them to be able to be around people they described as knowing what they had been through. That when they broke down, the other women understood. And that wives group is still in existence today.
Really?
But they dropped the young. Now it's Wives Club.
Wives Club. All right.
The fathers of the town started men's choir. I'm going to try and say this word, and please forgive me. I hope I don't butcher it. Anisowen men's choir.
Okay.
It's a Welsh word. I'm so sorry. And a lot of the men have talked about how much that helped them because I think, again, at the time, a bunch of minors talking about their feelings just wasn't going to happen. But they sang about it. And singing is such a beautiful way to get your emotions out. What a, progressive way for, minors to cope with loss and tragedy. And now a number of the children who survived Aberfan are in that choir and in the wives group, which I think is just...
that's cool.
I really, really love that. There was a community center that was built with the disaster relief funds for the community to help the children. It apparently has this just banging swimming pool. Absolutely incredible for the kids, but everyone in the community is so proud of it. Everything I read about the community center is and the pool. The pool.
At least they got a pool out of it, I guess.
Yep. So, yeah, they did. That's part of what they did with the money they got from the government when they got it back, because so much of the money was gone at that point. Once they had enough, they did that. Now, ultimately, they weren't able to continue to afford to cover that. So it is now run by the government of Aberfan, which works out. They don't have to pay for the upkeep of it. And the relief fund now pays for primarily, today, the upkeep of the memorial garden and of the cemetery. And the memorial garden is incredible. The memorial garden is set on the location of Pantglass Junior School. And it's set up that they have these little walls that map the school's layout. So you can each of the classrooms. And, there's a plaque dedicating it. And it's just a really beautiful place. And I looked at a lot of pictures. I'm going to post some of the pictures of it in the show notes and on the Facebook post and whatnot. But a lot of the survivors talk about how they would go to the classroom that they were in, or the parents would go to the classroom where their children were found. And it's just, I've seen a lot of memorials, and this one just, it's not, it's really beautiful. It's a really, really beautiful tribute to the people who lost their lives. So yeah. And then I already said this before, but I'm going to say it again. Merthyr Vale ultimately closed in 1989 and it's no longer there. And the tips are all gone at this point. And
good riddance.
It's kind of insane when you look at the pictures from today, because even though the tips are gone, you can still see where they were. The grass that grows on those areas is like yellow and strangled. And it's just, I mean, we all know that coal has such a outsized impact on the environment, but it goes to so many different levels. And you can really see that in the pictures of where the tips used to be. So yeah, that is the story of Aberfan. And it is awful.
True catastrophe.
A true catastrophe on every level. And I feel like for this one, I mean, the catastrophe, the disaster itself is horrible. It's horrific. But it's the stuff that happened after. He stayed at a party. At a party.
Fuck that guy. You know?
And then, how close were you to your child?
Were you emotionally attached to your child?
No, they literally wanted to ask them, how close were you to your child? That is a direct quote from what they wanted to say to these bereaved parents.
Oh, that's a good way to get punched in the mouth. I'm just saying.
And then all the way to, you know, taking money from the relief fund and,
oh, you're getting me fired up again. I'm getting mad.
I've been mad for a week now.
Well, yeah, I don't blame you with the research. Oof.
Yep. So do you have any other feelings? Anything else you want to close out on? This is a one heavy ass podcast.
Oh my goodness. I mean, you had me sad. You had me mad. Woo. Yeah, there's some good. There's good that shines through. Clearly, like there's absolutely some good people there that were there that you mentioned whenever something's happening in our world today, and you tell the kids this all the time. I'm trying to remember who the quote was from.
Mr. Rogers.
Yeah, Mr. Rogers. Look for the helpers.
Yep, you always gotta look for the helpers, and in disasters in particular, I feel like there is always helpers. Unfortunately, that's not always true in other things, but for these big scale stuff, there's almost always helpers. And in this one, 2,000 people. That town only had 8,000 people. 2,000 people showed up from all over. And they talk about, I didn't get into this as much, but like the entire town was literally closed down because they couldn't fit any more cars. There's no more room. Harold Wilson had to walk in. The prime minister had to walk in.
With a shovel.
No, Lord Snowden had the shovel.
Oh,
the prime minister had
yes.
to walk in, though.
Yeah, make the prime minister walk.
Harold Wilson was fine. That man didn't do anything. So yeah, that's going to be the end of our first podcast. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you liked it, we would love a follow and a review. And then we have socials. We have our Facebook page, which is Catastrophe Chronicles. We have an Instagram page, which is also Catastrophe Chronicles. You can email us at catastropheChroniclespod@gmail.com. There's a Twitter, which I can't remember the handle for, but it's there.
We'll post it.
We'll post the Twitter handle, and you can find it on the other things. And then there's a website, catastrophe-chronicles.com. So you can get in touch with us on any of those. If there's something you want to hear, if you want to support the pod, you can go through that. We're going to have more information about a Patreon at some point once I have a little bit more of a handle on that. But yeah, we're really excited. I hope you guys enjoyed this, and I hope to talk to you soon.
Yeah. And post some more catastrophes.
Yeah, I've been posting on this day in catastrophe. So if you go to the Facebook or the Insta, you'll see that stuff, which I think is fun. I've been enjoying that. So stay safe and stay curious. We'll see you later.
Till next time.